Hi, my name is Gergely Sipos, or Shippy. I work here at Alice since a decade, and most of that time I've been doing front-end work, web development, and stuff like that. And one thing about me that I also play Dungeons and Dragons, so it was match made in heaven for me to make a web app for Dungeons and Dragons. So what is Dungeons and Dragons? Hands up, who is or has been playing Dungeons and Dragons sometime? Oh, there are quite few. Who has heard about it? Very lot. And who has no idea what the heck is that? A couple, yeah. Don't worry, it's not something. You still have time. You know. All right. So first of all, it's a tabletop game. You basically gather some friends, if you have those, and sit around the table and play it. Simple enough. But it is also a role-playing game, meaning that some of the players are or have characters that they play, act, so to say. And there is a game master who is basically playing all the other characters. Meaning that, let's say, there is one player is a orc barbarian, and other is like a wizard of some sort. And the game master says that, hey, you go into a tavern, you see some drunken dwarfs sitting around the table, and one of them starts to grab the waitress. What do you do? And now it's your turn to decide how the story goes. So, first of all, this aspect makes it a cooperative storytelling, that the game master brings you a story, places you in a situation, but it's up to you and your characters to see how the story unfolds. And there are multiple ways to play this. So you can play like each session is a completely different start, but you can play like a continuous story with the same characters. My oldest game is like started 4 or 5 years ago, and we are playing with the different characters. So we have a huge background and story and experiences that we lived together. And it's also a sandbox game. Basically, it's your game. It has rules like every other tabletop game, but you can make your own rules. Basically, there is a rule book that gives you a couple of magical items that your characters can possess, but you can make your own or play a completely different one, because Dungeons and Dragons basically a framework that you can work with. Doesn't make it clearer for those who don't know what Dungeons and Dragons is. No, don't worry. So, how does it start? Well, these two gentlemen, Gergely and Dave Arneson, sometime in the 70s, have been playing these war games like big ass tables, where they had miniature castles and miniature armies, and they played castle sieges. And they thought, okay, this is good and fine and all, but what about playing the journey of the single heroes? And they sit together and created Dungeons and Dragons. Currently it is owned by Wizards of the Coast, a small company, basically have two kinds of product, Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. It makes $1 billion a year. So it's a little money. All right, so it started in the 70s, the first edition, and over the years it got bigger and more expansions. In the early 2000, the third edition arrived, which is important because I play both the current 5th edition and the older 3.5 edition. And what happened is, the labels are not quite readable, but the important thing is that the 3rd edition was basically for the biggest one in terms of content. They also released a subset of this game system under an open game license, which is basically an open source license but for tabletop role-playing games. And in the between of the 3rd and 5th edition, there was a 4th edition, but we don't talk about that because it was so bad that some guy went back to the 3.5 and started Pathfinder, which became its main alternative and competitor of Dungeons and Dragons. And also in the 80s, they started Forgotten Realms. If you are not familiar with D&D, this is basically a fantasy world because your characters have to live in a world. There has to be cities, adventures, events happening around them that they can interact with it in the game. So they started building it. So either you can build your own fantasy world or you can just grab Forgotten Realms and use that and place your characters in that. And okay, side story. When the 5th edition came out, it basically made the rules much simpler, much more streamlined. It had basically made Dungeons and Dragons more accessible because you didn't have to memorize so many rules and game mechanics and stuff like that. But Forgotten Realms has an established story of how stuff works in that world, like how wizards and magic works. And since 5th edition changed, there are some group of writers who write novels and books for Forgotten Realms, and they occasionally sit together and find out what will be the next happening in the Forgotten Realms history. And basically they said, okay, the magic changed. What do we do? Well, okay, let's bring some evil gods. They kill the gods of magic, apocalypse happens, then the new god of magic brings new rules. And then we arrive to 5th edition. I think it's quite genius. So, 5th edition had a different effect because its simple rules allowed them to implement the game rules and content in a web app because it's 2020 and basically you can build pretty much interactive web apps. So they made everything as D&D Beyond is basically a one-go tool to play D&D 5th edition because you can add your characters, your campaign, items, magic, whatever. So, and also all the content is available officially here. As you can see, this is a character sheet here. Its name is Piroshka. She's a nice lady. And as you can see, there are quite a lot of numbers here. There are basics like how much strength does she have. She's a bit more on the dexterous side, but she has quite a lot of constitution, but she's not quite smart. So these stuff like saving throws, like someone throws a fireball at you, you have to roll a dexterity save to try to roll away, escape from the fireball that's gonna hurt you. And there are quite a lot of things that your character can do. Basically, if I go to the skills, there are a bunch of stuff that describes how your character works, what what she can do and what she can do better. Also, there are, spells. She can cast Burning Hands, for example, and these numbers are not very difficult to calculate, basically 2 plus 2 or 2 plus 3, but there are quite a lot of numbers to keep in mind, and you can play with pencil and paper. That's the classic way of keeping track of what's going on. But if your team has some clerics or wizard and they are casting buffs on you, like you got more something, defense or I don't know, then you just have to keep track of the bonuses, and the enemy sorcerer is casting some nasty thing on you. So it's can be quite cumbersome to keep track of it by hand. So I thought if I play 3.5, I kind of want the same functionality that I have in D&D Beyond. So why not build an application for D&D 3.5? So a couple years ago, I started to build one, and there's just one little problem. 3.5 is huge. I mean, there is 70 books of content and just for 3.5. And okay, it has, the core rules are 6 books basically, give or take, and the supplementals are basically how to do castle sieges, how to, I don't know, do naval combat when 2 pirate ships attacking each other. There are rule books for that because that's absolutely necessary. But it's also one of the good things, because if your characters are in the ocean and somebody attacks them with a ship, then it's nice to have a book that describes what happens then. And as I said, part of the core rules are released under the OGL license, which is the open game license. And it allowed 3.5 to thrive because you could create your own content and sell it. Totally fine, because OGL allowed you to build something compatible with the D&D system. So it's not enough that it's already a lot of content, it's basically infinite. And basically everyone who plays have their own additions to it. And it's totally fine. This is about basically a sandbox. So if I wanted to make a web app, I have no dreams of putting all the content in the app. My goal was that making it easier to add your own content, the content that you actually use, because that's a lot smaller than the whole thing, and basically making it flexible enough to handle the rule set of 3.5, because the 5th edition is much simpler, so it's easier to implement all the rules. But for 3.5, it's much older. They didn't have that consideration that someone sometime want to code this. So Project Mjolnir was born, because every home project needs an epic name. And here it is. So simple web app. What I have is the characters part. I have the character sheet. You can create classes like wizard, fighter, druid, I don't know, dragon, shaman, whatever. And feats. Basically, feats are a small bit of special things that your characters level up during their adventures, and feats allow you to fine-tune and a little bit customize your characters. Races, you can be an elf, you can be a human, a dwarf, or something exotic like a talking frog or something, whatever floats your boat. And your character can have magical items. Yeah, that's the next step. I don't have that because magical items are quite tricky since, okay, there is a simple magical item, Sword of Sharpness, and it adds +2 to attack. Fairly simple. But there are other items like Thor's Mjolnir, which is basically a hammer that flies and casts lightning and comes back and basically has its own personality and can have its own agenda and thoughts and stuff like that. So it's just too much, but we don't get there. So let's take a look. I have a couple characters here. He's not looking so good, so yeah, that one. So what I have here is basically a name, couple of basic infos on the character. This is just for the flavor of it, and there are some statistics like health that can, adjust it and stuff like that. If you get hit, your HP goes low. If it goes to 0, then you are near being dead, and somebody has to help you. Otherwise, there are the basic statistics here, like strength, dexterity, stuff like that, like carrying capacity, how much stuff your character can carry, your skills. This is very similar than what I've shown you in D&D Beyond, basically how well a character can climb, how well can a character can negotiate in a diplomatic type of situation. And yeah, bunch of these stuff. There are a lot of it. And yeah, as you can see. And this is basically it. So there are some basic rules that are implemented, but otherwise the statistics and properties of the character is here. Like, it's just a simple text box. I can go and say, okay, random divine power, how should we calculate this? Like, let's say it depends on the wisdom, and let's multiply with the intelligence. I could basically type in here any kind of formula, which is pretty flexible and offers me the flexibility I need. And I can do more complex ones like parentheses, adding stuff like charisma to it, or just so. And if I go down, here you can see the classes and feats that are added to this character. Here is a table that describes basically everything, how it is calculated. Like, I have the armor class, and it depends on a bunch of other stuff. Like, and if I go, what was my random divine power? Yeah, so it's gonna be on the bottom side. Yeah, it's 172 because of how much wisdom and int this character has. So basically this is where the magic happens. Like, I can go and see on the feats. Let's say I have an awakened frightful presence, because this is a kobold, this is a little dragon, and dragons have, this frightful presence where they are really scary, and it's funny that you have this little thing being so scary. And you can have this, and this is basically just a text that describes what does it do, and at the end you have this little box that basically adds the numeric values, like how much the range of the frightful presence have, and how do you calculate what the stuff. And it can be edited, removed. Basically the content is markdown, so it's fairly simple to style, but it's easy to handle. So how does this work? I mean, now the hardcore part. So just an example. We have the character can climb. It's based on the strength and how much training does the character put into climbing stuff. And if the character is wearing some kind of armor, that basically makes it harder to climb on stuff. So what I didn't want to do is basically implement these operators like the parentheses, the plus, the minus, and multiply. I don't want to deal with that. It's a hobby project. I want to get to the point fast. So what are my options here? It kind of looks like a code if I just rephrase it, right? So this looks pretty good. Actually, I have to provide, the additional parameters like the strength, armor penalty, climb rank. So it works. This could work. But how can I do such a thing? Well, evil. That's one thing, and you're right. No. I can evolve this. No. Yes. Never. If you want to contain it in something that prevents all the malicious code that can be entered there. So, but we got other opportunities like the function constructor, which is still not secure, but it's faster. So it's better. But not all hope is lost. Because we already have to kind of understand what's in this expression, right? So what if we would go and so first, evil scripts shall go to the shadow realm. I'm not joking, this is the actual ECMAScript proposal in the CT39. So in some time in the future, we will be able to create a shadow realm object, evaluate our string expressions there, and so it's going to be encapsulated in a secure and isolated environment for our custom user-entered scripts. But this is a future. It's in stage 3, so it's waiting for development from the side of browsers, which they didn't implement yet. But since my hobby project is not progressing very fast, so they probably implement it faster than I will, my application. So it's probably fine. Anyway, let's compile this expression with TypeScript, because why not? So all you have to do is basically import create source file, and you give the expression, you set some parameters, whatnot, and you create a source. So what the hell is this? It's basically an abstract syntax tree, which is, I show you, this is this, a data structure that allows you to work with source code. You can understand it, modify it, write it back. So basically tools like ESLint or Prettier that go code quality checks, code formatting, all use these kind of data structures. So if I go here and I click on the 10th, this is a numeric literal. Cool. It's basically inside a binary expression, which has a minus token, a left side and the right side. Pretty simple, right? And above that, we have a parenthesized expression that's also in a binary expression. And we got an identifier, which is the strength modifier. So we got the identifiers, so we can tell what we want to calculate and what is necessary for this to calculate, so we can determine what is the strength modifier and what is the strength value. So let's go over it quick. So TypeScript offers a bunch of utility functions that helps you work with abstract syntax trees. So you still have the expression, create the source file, and you can do a bunch of validating statements. Like I can say and go that this expression must be an expression statement, it must be a binary statement. I can make additional checks like this expression must not have anything that's remotely resembling anything like a function call. So if it has to be a binary expression, it has to be in this exact format, and it must not contain any function that kind of limits what a malicious code can do. I'm not saying it could prevent all, because I'm not a security expert on this, but it's good enough. So it's a tree structure, so I write a recursive function that goes over the nodes of the tree, gets the identifiers, and basically flattens the array, so I get basically a string array with the stuff that's in my expression. So I get the calculated property, which is the strength modifier. I get all the others that are in the second part of the expression. And then I'm good to go. So I can go collect all these kind of expressions and calculate them, and then I can just, create the UI and put it in a nice layout. So the result will be is basically this: a global function constructor. It's I gave all the necessary attributes that it needs to calculate the strength modifier and return the result. It works quite simple. So the rest of the application is basically full standard, like React, TypeScript, Material UI. It also didn't start with Material UI. I started with style components, then I migrated to Chakra UI, then I migrated to Material UI. Yeah, it's a hobby project. So basically, items are hard to tackle, so I, replaced the UI framework because. And for the state management, I do Mobex, and for database, I use Firestore. You can notice that it doesn't have a backend because it doesn't need a backend. Because Firestore has a nice SDK, I can put stuff there, delete, update. Actually, I can subscribe to entities or documents there, and what it means that anywhere else, if it gets modified, my application gets notified of the changes immediately. And since it's integrated with Mobex, my React app updates automatically if there is any change in the backend. And it is deployed to Vercel because it's easy, and in comparison, that Zoltán said that Firebase hosting is good because it's simple, but this is simpler. Because Firebase hosting is basically, you have to open a terminal and type in Firebase deploy. You don't have to do this. You just provide, here is my repository, here's my build command. Yeah, that's the folder, host it, yeah, do the shit. And it goes and deploys all your branches as well, so you have multiple versions of your application running simultaneously for free for individuals. And it has additional features like you can comment on the UI part, and it's basically the Vercel goes and comments to your GitHub pull request that, hey, you have a comment on your UI. So for a front-end heavy development, it's a better alternative. Also a workbox for a service worker, because you can say that shipping a whole TypeScript compiler to the client is a bit overkill, and it is because it's 2 megabytes of JavaScript. So it's quite big, but it's not something that you can't handle. Basically, you have to, asynchronously load the TypeScript library, make sure that code splitting and tree shaking is enabled. Then, if you configure your service worker, the client only needs to load once this big JavaScript, and then you can apply quite aggressive caching, so it doesn't need to reload every time the user opens it. And this works because the application is something that the user comes, interacts with it, works with it, and comes back. So it's a different use case than an average website, like a news site. Let's say the telex, basically. You go there on your mobile phone, load it, read it, throw it away. But with an application, you can count on it that the user will be returning, and that kicks in the service worker, and you can rely on it that handles your caching and stuff like that. All right, thanks for listening.